Before the city, before the bridges, before the roar of 10 million souls at the bend of this great river, there was silence. Marsh. A wide brown river pushing quietly toward the sea. Willow and reed along its banks. The occasional flash of a kingfisher. The year is 42 AD. The Roman Empire, the greatest military machine the world had ever seen, had recently begun its conquest of Britannia. Emperor Claudius ordered the invasion in 43 AD. Within months, Roman legions crossed the Channel, defeated the Cativalani tribe, and began the transformation of this wild island. The Romans needed a crossing on the Thames, wide enough for commerce, narrow enough to bridge, deep enough for supply ships. They found it here, where two low hills rose on the north bank. They called it Londinium. The first Londinium was a military and commercial outpost. Timber buildings around a wooden bridge, a quayside for unloading goods from across the empire. Olive oil from Spain, wine from Gaul, pottery from Italy, and in return, tin, wool, silver, and hunting dogs. By 60 AD, Londinium had grown into a bustling, cosmopolitan town of perhaps 30,000 people. Romans, native Britons, freed slaves, all drawn to trade and opportunity. Its heart was the Forum and Basilica, the largest north of the Alps outside Rome. Law courts, administration, markets, the business of empire. And then it burned. Queen Boudica of the Iceni, angered by Roman brutality after her husband's death, led a revolt that destroyed Londinium. The city was burned. Thousands killed. Archaeology still reveals a layer of red-brown burned clay beneath modern London, the scar of Boudica's fury. Her revolt eventually failed. Roman legions, disciplined and strategic, defeated her forces. Boudica died, by her own hand or illness. Londinium rose again, grander, more permanent. New forum, governor's palace, temples, bathhouses, and walls. The Roman walls, begun around 190 AD, enclosed 3 miles, 10 feet thick, 20 feet high, with gates at Aldgate, Bishopsgate, Newgate, and Ludgate. They defined London for centuries to come. Even today, fragments of these walls remain beneath modern streets. At its height, Roman Londinium may have housed 60,000 people. Amphitheater, temples, and a sophisticated urban culture. A real city of the Western Empire. By the late 3rd and early 4th centuries, Rome was weakening. Britain became marginal. Troops withdrew. Imperial support vanished. In 410 AD, Emperor Honorius told Britain to look to its own defense. Roman London faded. Population declined. Buildings collapsed. Trade stopped. Archaeologists call this the Dark Earth, layers of abandonment covering former Roman streets. Londinium, after 3.5 centuries of life, simply stopped. But the walls remained. The roads remained. The river crossing remained. The memory of the city, even if no one remembered Rome, remained in the shape of the land itself. London had not died. It had only gone to sleep. It would wake again. The great Roman walls stand, cracked in places, streaked with rain, ivy beginning to climb the stone. Inside, emptiness. The Forum is a field of broken stone. The basilica has collapsed into itself, roof timbers rotted, tiles scattered across the ground. Weeds push between paving stones that once rang with the boots of legionaries and wheels of merchant carts. A fox picks its way across the old Forum, stops, looks, disappears into the undergrowth. This is London. Or rather, this is what London has become. 500 years after the birth of Christ, the magnificent Roman walls still endure, enclosing 330 acres. Rubble, weeds, the ghost shapes of vanished buildings press up through the grass. Few scavengers pick through the ruins for stone or metal. Perhaps a handful of families shelter in hollowed remains of townhouses, perhaps none. Beyond the walls, along the north bank of the Thames, stretching west from the old city toward what is now Covent Garden and the Strand, smoke rises. The sound of hammering, of voices, of life. The Saxons are here. Timber longhouses with thatched roofs. Chickens in yards. Children running between buildings. A wooden quayside where small boats are loaded and unloaded. Muddy streets, but vital alive. The Anglo-Saxons, Germanic tribes who arrived after the Roman withdrawal from across the North Sea, did not move into the old Roman city. For generations, historians assumed they had occupied Londinium. Then, in the 1980s, Archaeologists in Covent Garden found Saxon pottery, metalwork, and building remains, not inside the walls, but a mile west. For 2 centuries, from roughly 500 to 700 AD, London's center of life lay in this settlement called Londonwick. A WIC denoted a trading place. And that is what it was. Why did they not use the Roman city? Perhaps the ruins were uncanny, relics of a civilization so different that the Saxons found them unsettling. Perhaps the western land was better drained, more suited for agriculture and trade. For 200 years, London's story unfolds outside its historic footprint. The old walls stand empty and watchful while a new city grows beside the river. The settlement grows. More buildings, a busier quayside. Boats from the continent unload pottery, glass, metalwork, wine. In return, wool, hides, grain, and slaves. The Venerable Bede, in the early 8th century, described London as a mart of many nations, accessible by land and sea. Not a political capital, but a city of commerce. Trade, exchange, money in motion. The gravity of commerce that London has always had. Then, alongside trade, comes faith. In 601 AD, Pope Gregory the Great writes to missionaries. London is decreed the seat of a great archbishop. But the archbishopric goes to Canterbury. London gets a bishop. Workers clear rubble on the highest point of the old Roman city. Foundations laid for a new cathedral. Mellitus, sent from Rome, becomes the first bishop of London. King Ethelbert grants land on Ludgate Hill. The first cathedral, St. Paul, is a modest timber structure. It stands on holy ground. It will endure in one form or another for 1400 years. Burned, rebuilt, replaced by the Norman Cathedral, burned again in 1666, then replaced by Rennes' magnificent dome. The chain of sacred continuity begins here, in 604 AD. A fleet of Viking longships cuts through gray swells. Oarsmen pull in rhythm. The coast of England ahead. For roughly a century, Londonwick prospers. Trade grows. Christianity spreads. Then, from across the North Sea, come the Vikings. The Norse raiders, mostly Danish, have been troubling the coast since the late 8th century. By the 830s and 840s, they are no longer raiding and retreating. They are staying, pushing inland, testing the strength of kingdoms. The first major Viking assault on London comes in 842 AD. They sweep up the Thames, hit Londonwick hard, burning, killing, taking what they can carry. Further attacks follow in 851 AD. 350 ships recorded on the Thames. Whether precise or exaggerated, the threat is real. Londonwick, strung along the open riverside with no walls, is terrifyingly vulnerable. The open trading settlement that made London rich also made it impossible to defend. The Viking threat intensifies. King Alfred walks the old Roman walls, hand on stone, eyes scanning height and strength. Alfred of Wessex, Alfred the Great, survived Viking onslaught, reorganized his forces, won the decisive Battle of Edington, negotiated the Treaty of Wedmore. In 886, he turns to London. The refoundation of the city inside the Roman walls after 4 centuries of abandonment is a strategic masterstroke. Stone walls the Vikings cannot burn. A defensible perimeter already proven. Streets replanned, waterfront developed, wells dug, markets established. People move from exposed Londonwick into Londonburg, London Fortress. The name Londonwick fades. The area becomes Aldwick, the old WIC, a ghost of the Saxon trading settlement. Alfred places his son-in-law Athelred in charge. London's importance grows. The river, the trade, the instinctive pull of commerce. A fleet of nearly 100 Viking ships on the Thames. Warriors, siege equipment. The city stands behind its walls. Raids continue through the late 9th and 10th centuries. In 994 AD, 94 ships commanded by Sweyn Forkbeard and Olaf Haraldsson besiege London. Attempted demolition of London Bridge fails. The city holds. Whether this inspired the nursery rhyme, London Bridge is falling down, is debated. The bridge, in all its incarnations, has been central to London for 2,000 years. Control the bridge, control the city. The Viking fleet withdraws. London stands. Sweyn Forkbeard launches a full-scale invasion. King Ethelred, the Unready, flees to Normandy. London submits. Sweyn dies in 1014. His son Nut fights for the throne, secures it in 1016. Nut rules England, Denmark, Norway, a North Sea empire, upholds laws, patronizes the church, acknowledges London's commercial importance. He sits at the Thames, commanding the tide not to wet his feet, demonstrating that even kings are powerless before God and nature. Edward the Confessor ascends the throne, returns from Normandy with Norman ideas, friends, tastes. His great project, Westminster Abbey, on Thorney Island, a mile upstream, a vast Romanesque church, grand, devoted to St. Peter, consecrated December 28, 1065. Edward dies January 5, 1066. Harold Godwin's crowned at Westminster Abbey. 3 men claim the throne. Harold Hardrada and William of Normandy prepare their armies. 1066 begins, the Saxon world of Londonwick and Londonburh, of Alfred's walls and Viking raids. William of Normandy had shattered Harold's army at Hastings on October 14, 1066. He had marched north, expecting London to submit immediately. It did not. The city, wealthy, organized, proud of its ancient rights and its commercial power, was not simply going to open its gates because a foreign duke told it to, battle or no battle. London in 1066 was not merely the largest city in England. It was a political force in its own right. Its citizens, the merchants and guild masters and property owners of the walled city, understood that whoever sat on England's throne needed London's taxes and London's trade. They had leverage, and for a brief, extraordinary moment, they used it. Inside the city walls, an emergency council, men arguing, some for submission, some for resistance, some for a new English king. In the weeks after Hastings, the surviving English nobles and the leaders of London briefly considered crowning Edgar Atheling, the last male of the old royal house, a teenage boy with a legitimate claim and no military power whatsoever, as king. It came to nothing. William, meanwhile, was doing what he had always done when faced with a city that would not surrender. He devastated the surrounding countryside. He burned villages. He destroyed crops and livestock. He made it calmly, methodically, unmistakably clear that resistance was not merely futile but fatal to everyone nearby. On Christmas Day, 1066, William was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey, the church his predecessor had completed just a year before. It was a ceremony laden with deliberate symbolism. By being crowned at Westminster, in the church of the sainted Edward the Confessor, William was making a statement. He was not a conqueror. He was the legitimate heir. He was continuing, not replacing, the English royal tradition. The congregation were asked to acclaim their new king, first in French, then in English. When the shout went up from the packed church, the Norman guard stationed outside heard the roar and panicked, assuming it signaled a riot. They began setting fire to the surrounding buildings. William, according to the chroniclers, was seen to tremble during the coronation. Perhaps it was the noise and confusion outside. Perhaps it was something else, the weight of the moment, the enormity of what he had done and what he now had to hold. He was king of a country that did not want him, a country whose language he could not speak, whose customs he did not share, whose people looked at him with a mixture of fear and smoldering hatred. He would hold it for 21 years, and in doing so, he would transform London more thoroughly than any ruler since the Romans. William understood London's importance instinctively. He also understood its danger. A city this wealthy, this populous, this proud of its traditions, required not just governance but control. Visible, physical, unmistakable control. His solution was architectural. He built a tower. The White Tower, the great central keep of what would become the Tower of London, was begun within months of the conquest and completed around 1078. It was built not of the local ragstone or the recycled Roman material that filled London's walls, but of stone, imported from Normandy across the Channel. Pale, almost white in the right light, it rose to a height of 90 feet, a structure with no equivalent anywhere in England. It was placed with military precision at the southeastern corner of the Roman walls, directly on the river. From its upper floors, you could see ships approaching from the Thames estuary to the east. You could see the entire city spread out to the north and west. You could, if you chose to think about it that way, watch everything and everyone. The tower was not, in its origins, primarily a place of imprisonment or execution. That reputation, vivid and well-earned, came later. It was a royal palace, a treasury, a fortress, an armory, and above all a statement. This is what Norman power looks like. It is made of stone. It does not burn. It is looking at you, and it will be looking at your grandchildren, and their grandchildren after that. William also built two further fortresses, Baynard's Castle and Montfichet's Tower, at the western end of the city walls. 3 fortresses triangulating the city. The message to London's citizens was geometrically precise. You are valuable to us, and you are watched. And yet William was shrewd enough to know that control and commerce were not the same thing. London's wealth depended on its freedoms, on the rights of merchants to trade, to govern their own affairs, to settle disputes according to their own customs. Crush those freedoms, and you killed the goose. So alongside the fortresses, William issued a charter. The William Charter, a tiny strip of parchment, barely 4 inches wide, written in Old English rather than Latin as a gesture toward its English recipients, grants the citizens of London their rights and customs as they existed in the time of King Edward. It survives today in the archives of the Corporation of London, the oldest document in their collection. In its few brief lines, it establishes a principle that would shape London's relationship with royal power for the next 1,000 years. London had rights. Those rights preceded the conquest and would survive it. The city could be commanded, but it could not be simply owned. Over the following 2 centuries, Norman London grew with a speed that astonished contemporaries. The population expanded, from perhaps 15,000 at the time of the conquest to perhaps 80,000 by 1300, making London one of the great cities of Northern Europe. New neighborhoods pushed beyond the walls in every direction. The suburb of Southwark on the south bank of the Thames grew substantial enough to have its own churches, markets, and inns. To the west, the separate royal city of Westminster, where the court permanently resided, was developing its own distinct identity. And between these 2 cities, London and Westminster, barely a mile apart along the river, yet utterly different in character, a relationship was forming that would define English political history for centuries. London had money. Westminster had power. London had merchants and guild masters and the self-governing instincts of a commercial republic. Westminster had kings, courts, and the apparatus of royal authority. Neither could exist without the other. Neither entirely trusted the other. The tension between them, between commercial London and political Westminster, between the city and the crown, runs like a live wire through English history from the Norman conquest to the present day. Henry VIII ascended the throne of England in April 1509, and London, already the richest and most populous city in the kingdom, erupted in celebration. The old king, Henry VII, had been careful, secretive, and parsimonious. His son was everything his father was not: magnificent, generous, recklessly confident, a man who seemed to embody the Renaissance ideal of the complete prince, scholar, athlete, musician, theologian, and warrior all at once. London adored him. For a while, what no one in those early celebrations could have predicted, what Henry himself could not have predicted, was that his reign would produce the most radical transformation of London since the Norman conquest. Not through military conquest this time, not through fire or plague, but through the collision of one man's personal desires with the tectonic forces of European religious history. The English Reformation was coming, and it would remake London's physical, spiritual, and cultural landscape beyond recognition. The story of the English Reformation has been told 10,000 times, and at its center is always this: a king who wanted an annulment from his first wife to marry another, a pope who would not grant it, and a set of historical circumstances that turned a personal crisis into a theological revolution. Henry's desire to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, who had failed to produce a surviving male heir after 20 years, ran headlong into the political reality that Pope Clement VII was effectively a prisoner of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, who happened to be Catherine's nephew. The Pope could not grant what Henry demanded without humiliating the most powerful ruler in Europe. Narrator VO. The impasse lasted years. And then, in the early 1530s, Henry and his chief minister Thomas Cromwell found a solution. If the Pope would not give Henry what he wanted, England would simply stop recognizing the Pope's authority. The Act of Supremacy of 1534 declared Henry VIII the supreme head of the Church of England. England was no longer Catholic, not in the Roman sense. A church that had answered to Rome for nearly 1,000 years now answered to the crown. It was a revolution achieved not by popular uprising or theological debate in the streets, but by parliamentary statute and royal will. The dissolution of the monasteries, carried out between 1536 and 1540 under Thomas Cromwell's ruthlessly efficient administration, was the greatest redistribution of property in England since the Norman conquest. Across the country, 800 religious houses were closed, their assets seized by the crown, their communities dispersed. In London, the consequences were immediate and physical. The great religious establishments that had shaped the city's geography for centuries were stripped of their wealth, their buildings repurposed or sold or left to decay. The scale of what was lost is difficult to overstate. These were not merely buildings. They were hospitals, schools, libraries, centers of artistic production. They were the safety net for the poor, the institutions that fed the hungry and sheltered the destitute. When the monasteries closed, that safety net simply vanished. London's poor, suddenly without the charitable infrastructure that had sustained them for generations, crowded into the streets and the riverside tenements in numbers that would define the city's social crisis for the next 3 centuries. But the dissolution also created opportunities, and London, always alert to opportunity, seized them. St. Bartholomew's Priory became St. Bartholomew's Hospital, still functioning today as one of London's great teaching hospitals, the oldest hospital in England on its original site, its foundation continuous from 1123. The Charterhouse Monastery became a school, Charterhouse School, which would educate generations of English boys before relocating to Surrey, leaving its name behind in the Charterhouse Square that still exists in Clerkenwell. The Blackfriars Precinct became a fashionable residential area, and eventually a theater district, its name preserved in the Blackfriars Theatre, where Shakespeare's company would later perform. The dissolution was property development on the grandest possible scale. The land released by the monasteries, enormous parcels of London and its environs that had been in religious hands for centuries, began to be built upon, accelerating the city's expansion beyond its medieval boundaries with a speed that alarmed contemporaries and could not be stopped. The Reformation was not achieved without blood. Those who refused to accept the royal supremacy faced the full ferocity of Tudor law. Thomas More, Henry's former Lord Chancellor, the brilliant humanist scholar whose utopia had made him famous across Europe, was beheaded on Tower Hill in July 1535 for refusing to take the oath acknowledging Henry as head of the church. Bishop John Fisher went to the same block in the same month. The Carthusian monks of the London Charterhouse, 18 of them, were executed over several years for the same refusal. London Watche, London remembered. Elizabeth I came to the throne in 1558, the third of Henry's children to rule, and by far the greatest. Her 45-year reign is the period that gave London its first genuinely global cultural identity, not through empire, but through language, through plays, through the most extraordinary outpouring of dramatic literature the world has ever seen concentrated in one city in one lifetime. The Globe Theatre, built in 1599 on Bankside from the recycled timbers of an earlier playhouse called simply the Theatre, was where Shakespeare's greatest works were first performed before a paying public. Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, Macbeth, The Winter's Tale, The Tempest, works that have shaped the imagination of the English-speaking world for 4 centuries were first heard in this open-air wooden theater on the south bank of the Thames. Elizabeth died on March 24, 1603, the last of the Tudors, at Richmond Palace. She had reigned for 45 years. London had grown from a city of perhaps 80,000 to a city of perhaps 200,000, the largest in the Western world. James VI of Scotland rode south to become James I of England. London welcomed him with the cautious enthusiasm it always reserved for new monarchs. The Gunpowder Plot of 1605, the conspiracy organized by a group of Catholic gentlemen to blow up the Houses of Parliament, is one of the most dramatic episodes in British political history. If it had succeeded, it would have been the most devastating single act of terrorism in European history. It did not succeed. The English Civil War, the conflict between King Charles I and his parliament that tore England apart between 1642 and 1651, placed London at the very center of the struggle. The city's sympathies were overwhelmingly with Parliament. In November 1642, the Royalist army advanced on London. At Turnham Green, it was met by an army of 24,000 parliamentary soldiers and trained band militia. The Royalists, outnumbered and unwilling to risk a frontal assault, withdrew. London held. Parliament held. The Commonwealth lasted 11 years. Oliver Cromwell governed as Lord Protector until his death in 1658. In May 1660, Charles II returned to England. London's welcome was extraordinary. The theaters reopened. Women were allowed on stage for the first time in English theatrical history. London, after the grey years of the interregnum, drank deep. Narrator VO. In the summer of 1665, the Great Plague arrived in London. The worst outbreak of bubonic plague the city had experienced since the Black Death. Between 75,000 and 100,000 people died in 18 months. But Lord, how empty the streets are, and melancholy. So many poor sick people in the streets, full of sores, and so many sad stories overheard as I walk. Everybody talking of this dead, and that man sick, and so many in this place, and so many in that. In the early hours of Sunday, September 2nd, 1666, a fire started in the bakehouse of Thomas Farriner, a baker in Pudding Lane. The Great Fire of London burned for 4 days. It consumed 436 acres, 13,000 houses, 87 parish churches, St. Paul's Cathedral, and much more. The fire has now got further, both below and above, and no likelihood of stopping it. We saw the fire as only one entire arch of fire from this to the other side of the bridge, and in a bow up the hill, for an arch of above a mile long. It made me weep to see it. Christopher Wren produced a plan for a rebuilt London on continental lines. Landowners insisted on rebuilding on their own plots. The medieval street plan survived largely intact. Parliament passed the London Rebuilding Act, mandating brick or stone, widening streets modestly, and establishing building regulations. 52 new parish churches and St. Paul's Cathedral were rebuilt. Wren's cathedral took 35 years to build, completed within his lifetime. The new London was a city of brick and stone, intellectually and commercially flourishing. The Bank of England, founded in 1694, laid the financial foundations for modern capitalism. London continued to grow as a commercial and intellectual capital. Queen and died on August 1, 1714. George I of Hanover succeeded her. London had transformed beyond recognition. The monasteries gone, the medieval skyline gone, the city brick and stone, rational and commercial, reaching toward the future. The monument to the Great Fire of London, designed by Christopher Wren and Robert Hooke and completed in 1677, stands 202 feet tall, exactly the distance between its base and the spot in Pudding Lane where the fire began. Wren is buried in St. Paul's Cathedral. His epitaph, inscribed in the floor of the crypt, reads, "Si monumentum requiris, circumspice." If you seek his monument, look around you. There is no more fitting epitaph for any builder in any city in history. The year is 1714. Queen Anne has died, and George I has arrived from Germany, unable to speak English. London watches, cautious, curious, aware that a new dynasty has begun. The city he inherits is changing. Commerce thrives along the Thames, trade with the Americas, Africa, and the East Indies booming. Coffee houses have become centers of conversation, debate, and the exchange of ideas. Newspapers circulate daily, shaping public opinion in ways unimaginable a century before. The River Thames is London's lifeline, bringing sugar, tobacco, tea, and the promise of wealth from across the globe. Docks expand, warehouses rise, and London becomes an engine of commerce and empire. Georgian London rises from the medieval city plan. Orderly squares, symmetrical terraces, and elegant townhouses define a new architectural era. But while the wealthy enjoy the refinement of Bloomsbury and Mayfair, the poor crowd the narrow alleys of Whitechapel and St. Giles, living in conditions scarcely improved from the Tudor era. The city is alive, vibrant, noisy, and full of contrasts. Education is spreading, schools for the children of the wealthy and charitable institutions for the poor appear, but London's streets remain crowded, its population growing steadily, from roughly 600,000 in the early 18th century to nearly 1 million by 1800. The first whispers of industrial change are in the air. Workshops and small factories begin to appear, powering textiles, metalwork, and shipbuilding. The foundations of the Industrial Revolution are laid, and London will soon be transformed from a mercantile hub into the heart of a new industrial world. Life is not only work and commerce. The Georgian elite enjoy gardens, theaters, and pleasure grounds. Art, music, and literature flourish. London becomes a center of intellectual and cultural activity as much as a commercial powerhouse. As the century closes, London has grown into a city of ambition, wealth, and complexity, a city poised to enter the Industrial Revolution in full, a metropolis that will define the modern era. The 19th century begins with London already one of the largest cities in the world, but what is coming will change everything. Population rises at an unstoppable pace, streets grow more crowded, and the city stretches far beyond its old boundaries. Villages and fields slowly disappear as London expands outward in every direction. The Industrial Revolution takes hold, factories begin to multiply, powered by steam engines that reshape how goods are made. Work becomes faster, harsher, and more demanding. Thousands leave the countryside and arrive in London searching for opportunity. Many find work, but just as many find hardship. Smoke fills the air, chimneys rise above rooftops, and the sky often turns gray with pollution. The Thames, once a lifeline of trade, becomes heavily polluted with industrial waste and human sewage. The smell alone becomes unbearable in the summer months. New railways transform the city. Iron tracks cut through neighborhoods, connecting London to the rest of Britain like never before. Great railway stations rise as symbols of progress and power. Trains bring people, goods, and ideas into the city at incredible speed. London becomes the center of a vast national network. With growth comes inequality. The rich live in elegant houses in areas like Kensington and Westminster, surrounded by comfort and order. The poor crowd into slums in the East End, where families live in tiny, overcrowded rooms with little sanitation. Disease spreads easily in these conditions. Child labor becomes common. Young children work long hours in factories, workshops, and as chimney sweeps, life for the working class is difficult, and survival itself is often a daily struggle. But change begins slowly. Voices rise calling for reform. Writers, thinkers, and activists start to expose the harsh realities of life in industrial London. Among them is Charles Dickens, whose stories bring attention to poverty, injustice, and the lives of ordinary people. His words help open the eyes of the public. Public health becomes a growing concern. Outbreaks of cholera strike the city multiple times during the century. Thousands die as doctors struggle to understand the cause. Eventually, new ideas about sanitation begin to take hold. A major turning point comes when a physician named John Snow traces a cholera outbreak to a contaminated water pump. This discovery helps change how cities think about clean water and disease. It marks the beginning of modern public health in London. Massive engineering projects begin to reshape the city. A new sewer system is designed to carry waste away from the streets and the Thames. It is one of the greatest infrastructure achievements of the century. Slowly, conditions begin to improve. Bridges are built across the Thames, connecting different parts of the city more efficiently. Roads are widened, and transportation becomes easier. Horse-drawn buses carry passengers through busy streets, and later, underground railways begin to appear. In 1863, the world's first underground railway opens in London. It is a revolutionary idea. Trains now run beneath the streets, carrying thousands of passengers every day. It changes how people move through the city forever. London also becomes the heart of a global empire. Goods arrive from India, Africa, the Caribbean, and beyond. The city becomes a center of finance, trade, and political power. Decisions made in London affect millions of people across the world. The docks grow larger and busier. Ships from every corner of the globe arrive loaded with goods. Warehouses fill with products that will be sold across Britain and Europe. London becomes the beating heart of global commerce. The Great Exhibition of 1851 showcases Britain's industrial power to the world. Held in the Crystal Palace, it displays inventions, machines, and products from across the empire. Millions visit, amazed by the scale and innovation. It is a moment of pride and confidence for Victorian London. Culture flourishes alongside industry. Museums, galleries, and libraries open to the public. Knowledge becomes more accessible, and education spreads further through society. Theaters continue to entertain audiences, and literature reaches new heights. But even with progress, challenges remain. Overcrowding, poverty, and inequality continue to define much of life in the city. Reform is slow, and change does not reach everyone equally. The police force is established to maintain order in the growing city. Streets become safer, and law enforcement becomes more organized. This marks a shift toward a more controlled and structured urban life. Street lighting improves. Gas lamps illuminate the city at night, making travel safer and extending life beyond daylight hours. London begins to feel like a city that never truly sleeps. As the century moves forward, new technologies continue to appear. Telegraphs allow messages to be sent quickly across long distances. Communication becomes faster, connecting London to the rest of the world in ways never seen before. The population continues to grow. By the end of the 19th century, London is home to more than 6 million people. It is the largest city on Earth, a vast, complex metropolis filled with opportunity, struggle, ambition, and change. The East End remains a place of hardship. Overcrowded housing, low wages, and difficult working conditions define life for many. It is here that some of the darkest stories of the century unfold. In 1888, a series of mysterious and brutal murders shocked the city. The identity of the killer is never confirmed. Fear spreads through the streets, and the name Jack the Ripper becomes known across the world. It reveals the darker side of Victorian London. Despite this, the city continues to evolve. New buildings rise, streets expand, and infrastructure improves. London becomes more organized, more modern, and more powerful with each passing decade. Education expands further, schools become more common, and literacy rates increase. More people gain access to knowledge, opening new opportunities for future generations. By the end of the century, London stands as the capital of a vast empire, a city of industry, culture, and global influence. It has transformed from a growing European city into the center of the modern world. The foundations laid during this century will shape the future. The next era will bring even greater challenges and changes, wars, technology, and global shifts that will test the strength of the city like never before. London moves into the 20th century, stronger, larger, and more important than ever before, ready to face a future that no one can fully predict. The 20th century begins with London at the height of its global power, a city leading a vast empire, strong, confident, and influential. New technology transforms life. Electricity replaces gaslight. Cars appear on the streets, and communication becomes faster than ever before. London enters a modern age. In 1914, the First World War begins. Thousands leave London to fight. Many never return. The city changes forever. By 1939, war returns. The Second World War brings destruction to London. The Blitz rains bombs across the city. Buildings collapse, fires spread, and families take shelter underground. But London does not fall. People stand together, survive together, rebuild together. After 1945, reconstruction begins. New buildings rise, and the city slowly recovers. A modern London starts to take shape. Immigration transforms the city. People from around the world arrive, bringing new cultures and ideas. London becomes more diverse, more vibrant, more global. By the late 20th century, London is no longer just an imperial capital. It is a global city, a center of finance, culture, and influence. The skyline changes. Modern towers rise beside historic landmarks. The past and present exist together. In 2005, attacks shake the city, but London remains strong, united in the face of tragedy. In 2012, the Olympic Games bring the world to London, a moment of pride, celebration, and global recognition. In 2020, a global pandemic slows the city. Streets fall silent. life pauses. But London recovers, adapts, and moves forward once again. By 2026, London stands as a city shaped by centuries of history, a place of resilience, diversity, and constant change. A city that never stops evolving, never stops growing. London continues, always moving forward, always alive.